Lock down the old, release the young. The chance of dying from the virus for people under 40 is about 0.2%. Those odds are 500 to 1. And that's what Ladbrokes will give you on Piers Morgan being the next Prime Minister of the UK. We're talking about limiting coronavirus's exposure to a group of people that it kills at a high rate. And that's possible by putting one big group of people into lockdown. Not Liverpool, not Leeds, not Manchester, the elderly. Hello, from my living room. It's a young man who can't go into the office. New coronavirus lockdown measures are in place. A traffic light 3-tier system.
This is not how we want to live our lives, but this is the narrow path we have to tread.
Now let me tell you why they're wrong. Lockdowns are currently only based on geography, when they should also be based on age. Lock down the old, release the young. But before we argue about ageism, discrimination and utilitarianism, first, an aside. Endless lockdowns will not beat coronavirus. They're not the answer. National house arrest is a temporary measure to prepare for and delay the pandemic's peak, allowing us time to build capacity in our healthcare system, research therapeutics, and most importantly, build an effective contact tracing system. Those are the publicly available lessons taught by the likes of Vietnam, South Korea, and New Zealand. But Boris and Dom have fallen asleep at the back of the classroom. And now we're trapped in an endless cycle of opening and shuttering businesses and social events. Thanks, Dido. But even in our current situation, the UK could be locking down in a more effective manner by basing isolation on age rather than just geography. At this point, there are two major risks posed to our society by the pandemic. The first is transmission of the virus to the vulnerable and elderly, where it's most lethal. Fatalities among 50-year-olds are 20 times as great as they are for 20-year-olds. And among 60-year-olds, they're 50 times greater. 80% of the deaths so far are people over 70. The second is an overwhelming of the NHS. Trolleys in corridors, no room for COVID admissions, let alone routine care. That's an unlikely scenario now. Possible, but unlikely. Given the lessons learnt in March, the temporary hospitals built, and the 2 antiviral treatments available. So primarily, we're talking about limiting coronavirus's exposure to a group of people that it kills at a high rate. And that's possible by putting one big group of people into lockdown. Not Liverpool, not Leeds, not Manchester, the elderly. I'm not saying young people aren't affected by coronavirus. Long COVID poses a real and nasty problem. But the young who do suffer that horrific multi-organ damage are exceptional. At the moment, we're asking people who are likely to feel nothing more than a common cold or no symptoms at all to endure solitary confinement and loss of income while we willingly flush the economy down the toilet. I'm also not suggesting that millennials should be forced back onto packed commuter trains and basement nightclubs, but they should be free to choose. If young people still want to lock down, they can. It's not a diktat or a command to return to economic life, but we should be open to the idea that if there are young people who are willing to spend money or go back to work, we should give them the ability to do it, at the very least. Because the current situation is not working. Everyday students are kept out of school or university, the education gap between rich and poor will widen. The longer we put normal life on hold for the under 30s, the further they'll slip from financial stability and one day buying a house. That risks a lost generation. This balance between economic activity and the spread of the virus is what the government is attempting to perform. Young people fit the bill quite nicely. The chance of dying from the virus for people under 40 is about 0.2%. Those odds are 500 to 1. And that's what Ladbrokes will give you on Piers Morgan being the next Prime Minister of the UK. There are more than 4 million young private sector workers who don't live with their parents or any older adults. It's about 1/6 of the UK's workforce. Personal debt is at its lowest since the financial crash, and business debt is at its highest. Every small business that I interact with, my barber, my gym, tell me that they're running on borrowed time unless we return closer to normal, and that a second lockdown would push them under. Consumer trends show that young people are more inclined to spend their cash. Let them. Also, they'll feel the effects of a recession harder than any other age group. They're the lowest earning, have fewer savings, and protected earnings, like a pension. And there are risks. Every decision you make in your life is a balance of probabilities. But there are no risk-free ways out of this. The logic of this argument is the exact same as that at the peak of lockdown, that the most vulnerable should shield, not go to the shops, not go outside for exercise. If you accept that those people should shield, it follows that the least vulnerable shouldn't. Now, this strategy is not plain and simple ageism. It does not discriminate against the elderly on the basis of unfounded prejudice. It does, instead, on the basis of empirical medical fact. This fact, that the elderly are more likely to require hospitalisation or die, is morally relevant because if it's our aim to prevent that circumstance, and that aim can be achieved by selective isolation of one group, what then is the justification for universal isolation? Why restrict the liberty of all when you can achieve the same result by restricting it of one group? These arguments can be made about any group that's more susceptible to COVID. Men, ethnic minorities, and the obese. But in each instance, the calculation is utilitarian. Are the negative consequences of discrimination outweighed proportionally by its benefits? In the case of the elderly, it seems so. Those who call this position ageist are unlikely to say the same about how a potential vaccine will be rolled out across the UK. First society's eldest, the over 85s, then the most vulnerable, and then rolling down through the age groups until you get last to the under 50s. And rightly so. It would make no sense to first vaccinate the young, who are incredibly unlikely to feel the virus's worst effects. So, just as we use sex to screen for breast cancer, because women have a strong statistically higher likelihood of getting ill, using age as a parameter for lockdowns is medically and economically justified.